Quite possibly the most well-known fact of ancient history is that the Roman Empire fell. Why it fell, however, has been debated for centuries by historians and archaeologists. The Fate of Rome, Climate, Disease, and the End of an Empire, published in 2017 and written by Kyle Harper, a professor of classics at the University of Oklahoma, takes a new angle in attempting to answer this old question. This is the first work of its kind, a book-length study which attempts to integrate a myriad of different advances in archaeology, climatology, genetics, disease ecology, and environmental history to produce a new, sweeping study which situates the rise and decline of the Roman Empire of antiquity in an age of climate fluctuations. Organized into 7 chapters, including a prologue, an epilogue, and an appendix concerning the plague of Justinian which runs for 18 pages, the book covers 5 centuries of Roman history, beginning with the age of Marcus Aurelius and ending not in 476, but in the middle of the 7th century. Central to the book's overall thesis is what Harper calls the Roman miracle, that is, the astounding growth of the Roman Empire, spurred on to a very large degree, it would seem, by a period of unusual climate, the Roman warm period, or the Roman climate optimum. During this period, the population of the empire exploded to something like 75 million, boosted by prolonged growing seasons and favorable weather, thanks to the climate optimum. The climate cooled slightly in the 3rd century, and although Harper is careful not to make direct connections, the overlap between shortened growing seasons, cooler weather and food crises, and political instability in the 200s is indeed striking. Harper goes on to show that the climate rebounded slightly after 266, and the ensuing 4th century is strongly associated with a period that scholars now recognize as imperial renewal and regrowth. In many regions, the population appear to be growing again, and although we hear of food crises, they appear to be localized. The book next turns to the Huns, and mounting evidence suggests that, at least in part, the Eurasian steppe suffered a period of prolonged drought which may have played a role in forcing the Huns into Europe. The key to the book's thesis, however, lies at the microbial level. Drawing on recent work on the Antonine Plague and the Plague of Cyprian, Harper argues that the effects of both plagues were more widespread than once thought, and new ideas for the level of devastation are supported by bioarchaeology and genetics, which tell us that the majority of Romans were chronically malnourished, full of parasites, and generally unhealthy, even emperors. As a result, the population was far more susceptible to disease. The fall of the Roman Empire was far more than a political event, the book argues. Instead, it was essentially the unraveling of the entire Roman world. This was brought on in the 6th century by a combination of climate change, including the bizarre weather of 535 and 536, when the sun apparently disappeared, probably as a result of a massive volcanic eruption, or possibly 2, and the plague of Justinian, which is now confirmed to be Yersinia pestis, the Black Death, ravaged Europe, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. This was the context in which the Roman Empire truly fell, and Europe entered the Middle Ages. While Harper's book is not monocausal in argument, and while it does shed new light on old ideas about instability caused by the Huns, the loss of soldiers, inflation, and many other themes which any student of Roman history will likely find familiar, it has drawn criticism for perhaps presenting itself as overly deterministic. While this was not the intended aim, the book is written less for academics and more for a general audience, so some generalizing is of course to be expected. At the same time, its conclusions are incredibly important, because while the 4th century appears to have been a time of renewal, the 5th and 6th appear to be times of catastrophe. Too often scholars have looked for answers to these questions in wars and in invasions, but as Harper shows, there is far more at play here than meets the eye. The interdisciplinary approach to the book has generated both praise and criticism, with some seeing it as an excellent example of big history, while critics have been quick to point out that Harper is not an environmental historian, nor a scientist, and therefore the book does contain some errors. This is unsurprising, and as the book is the first of its kind, it is perhaps to be expected, and it can only serve as a jumping-off point for further interdisciplinary research, perhaps with an actual team of scholars. At times, Harper is also uncritical with the secondary literature, but the main contribution of the work is that it encourages us to look beyond text and material evidence, the usual traditional sources employed in doing history, and forces us to place the fall of the Roman Empire in a new, and perhaps more disturbing, context.